Hey there y'all, and welcome back to Cummings Gun Works. I'm out here in the shop today working on a stock for a double barrel, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk to y'all a little bit about double barrels, relay some information that I hope you'll find useful. So, shooters ready? Stand by! So I want to kick this video off just kind of talking about double barrels and what to look for when you're looking to buy one, particularly on the used market. There's a lot of variables that come into what makes a double barrel a solid choice. So I've got an example right here that we will just walk through real quick. So when you're at the gun show or whatever and you're trying to look at these and pick out one that you like, the first thing you're going to want to do is test the barrels, okay? You're going to take the forearm off. There are several different methods of these attaching. Some have a push button style like this one. Some will have a latch like this that you pull out to release. Some of them just snap on with spring tension. There's a lot of different ways in which they're made. When you take the forearm off, you want to push the tang lever over and remove the barrels. Now you want to test and see if the barrels ring. So you take it by the hook here and hang that on your finger. And it should sound, these are 12 gauge, they got a nice pitch to them. Some of the 20 gauge barrels won't have as much tone just because of the smaller diameter. But these ring very nicely, as you can hear. It's like a set of wind chimes. What that means is that the barrels are tightly mated together. This is important because it is an indicator of the condition of the solder that holds them together. If the solder comes loose, then the rib has to be removed and relayed, and it's got to be they have to be reattached to each other securely, because if the solder is missing or damaged anywhere, a couple of problems can occur. You can get moisture down in between the barrels that'll get trapped in there and rust them out from the inside where you can't even see it. Under enough concussive force from recoil, the break in the solder can come completely apart and your barrels can just fall apart, which obviously is not desirable. There's a number of reasons that you want to make sure the barrels are in good condition. Obviously, do your usual check down the bore, make sure there's no pitting in it. So that's how you check the barrels. The next thing you need to check is very important. With the forearm off, this gun needs a little bit of work, in fact, so it might be a good example for this. You want to grab it by the barrels and you want to shake it. You hear that sound? That means that there is a gap between the barrel and the face of the receiver here. It is a condition called off face. It can be repaired. It's a little time consuming to repair it. I've done it before on one or two myself. It's a fairly simple operation. It essentially involves building the material up here on the inside of the hook, excuse me, on the inside of the hook where it latches into the receiver. And then you will mark and file the face of the chambers here. You'll try to close it. It'll stop at a certain point because there's too much material in there, and then you will file off the face of the chambers until such a point where they close snugly, and that will fill that gap in. These need to have that process done to them. So that's the barrels. That's checking the barrels, make sure they ring, checking and make sure that they are on face. Go ahead and reinstall the fore end. You want to check the screws. This one, to be honest with you guys, this one was pretty cheap. I've got some nicer ones, but I wanted to bring this one out for demonstration. You know, check the screws, the flathead screws on the exterior of the receiver. You can see a lot of these are boogered up. That just means that somebody's had this thing apart who probably shouldn't have had it apart. It's not aesthetically pleasing, but doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong with the gun mechanically. It does detract from the overall value. Next, you want to check the wood. You want to check the wood and make sure that there are no gaps between the wood and the metal in the receiver. If there are gaps, they will need to be filled with glass bedding compound or something of that nature, because otherwise the uneven force of the recoil on the stock will cause it to break. Which is actually part of the problem I'm working on with this stock I've got on the bench right now. You want to look at the stock and make sure it's not oil soaked. If it is oil soaked, it will have to be soaked in acetone to draw the oil out, and the stock will have to be refinished. What that oil soaking does is weaken the grain through the wrist. It's a very common problem on older doubles. It'll weaken the grain of the wood through the wrist and cause it to break at some point in the future, which is also something that happened at this stock that's currently on my bench. A lot of problems. Which is pretty typical with these older guns. They've seen hard use. They haven't been maintained properly. But with a little TLC, they can be real diamonds in the rough. Now, on the subject of oil-soaked stocks, I want to talk briefly about storing your doubles. Always make sure that you store them barrel down. It doesn't have to be extreme angle. Just make sure you store them barrel down. This will ensure that after cleaning, any of the oil, cleaners, lubricants, anything that are left inside the barrels won't have a tendency to ride down and into the stock, which is how the oil soak problem occurs typically. It's very common. I'm trying to think if there's anything I'm missing. Check your steel for pits. Check and make sure your barrels ring. Check and make sure they're on face. Check your stock. Check your screws. As long as all of that is good to go, you should be looking at a very serviceable firearm. A pretty simple design. This one in particular, the majority of mine have extractors for the shells. You will see automatic ejectors, which are a bit more complicated. Occasionally you will find some of those automatic ejectors where the springs have broken. They're typically a flat spring in the forearm that controls the power for those, kicking the shells out. Not a very simple fix. If it's a newer production mass market gun, you can probably just buy a replacement off the shelf, but older ones will typically have to have a new spring made for them. This gun in particular, when I got it, I was not happy with the plastic safety catch that it had on it, so I hand cut and niter blued a new safety, and I went ahead and niter blued the triggers too while I had the bluing solution running. I think they came out quite nicely. They're just fun to handle. I love a double gun. I love double barrels. I love side-by-sides. I love the sight profile. I love the way that they point. Just the wider berth in the hand. It's very comfortable. And they have a certain je ne sais quoi. The mystique, the history, the fact that this design has been around for so long. People have been making them by hand for so long, and all of the engraving work and details, especially on the higher end stuff, where they really get into all the minutiae. It's really impressive, some of the stuff that these craftsmen and artisans are able to put out. So I personally really appreciate them and have a couple in my collection and intend to get more. They are among my favorite examples of firearms. Let me show you real quick what I got on the bench. Here you will see the parts for my Lorona 20 gauge side-by-side. I've got it taken apart here on the bench. I'll probably do a video at some point on how these things go together, how to assemble them. Over here, you see I got my Acroglass bedding compound out. Get a good shot of this. You can see here where I had to bed the halves of the stock back together. It was broken in shipping because the grain through the wrist was oil soaked. So I had to draw the oil out and rebind the two parts together. The top of the receiver, you can see a gap. A crack was starting to form there. I'm pretty sure I have some photos of that, and I'll go ahead and throw those up. I've got the wood that was splitting off. I've gone ahead and glued back down. It's reattached and solid. You won't even notice that it happened when I get done refinishing it. The next step is going to be glass bedding the receiver into the stock, just to make sure that it doesn't end up splitting again because of the uneven force that's being applied to the wood. You can see here on the bottom how thin the wood is in these double barrel stocks. It doesn't take much to break them, so that's why it's so important to ensure that all the metal is inletted appropriately and you've got very tight tolerances on how your parts mate together. So, yeah, double barrels, side by sides. A lot of fun, a lot of history, and I just love the aesthetic of them. You know, you can find some real gems at a gun show every now and then. Go ahead and pick them up and just enjoy the heck out of them. We can get into fitment, like your length of pull and everything. That'll have to be another video altogether. Both this gun and the one that's broken down right now were Spanish made. I find the history of Spanish gun making from the Ibar region in particular to be very fascinating. Just the history of like the steel and the processes that they went through, the effects of the Spanish Civil War and everything on their manufacturing. It's a really interesting, rich history, and there's a lot of craftsmen out there, particularly from earlier in the 1900s, that were putting out stuff that, in my opinion, were just as good as some of the English best, which you'll pay tens of thousands of dollars for. And you can pick up one of the Spanish ones for 10 grand or less. And then sticker shock, they're expensive, but that's because of all the handwork and time and craftsmanship that goes into making them and making them well. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you found it informative. If there's something you would like to know in particular about this topic, I've got a wide breadth of knowledge. Honestly, it's kind of difficult for me to gauge what people are going to find interesting. So if you have any suggestions, let me know in the comments below. Go ahead and check out my blog over at my website. And remember, not only your target, what's beyond it. Thanks, y'all.